Buddies, now is the time.
That was the awkward time?
No, now is the best time. That and our top three is a very special one. Is top three Disney legends. I will go first. And my very first one is you know that I like music, and the whole thing is to go to. It was pretty easy for me to go to a composer or a conductor or someone that was pretty much related to attractions, movies, and everything. And he was Buddy Baker. And Buddy Baker composed more than 200 scores for Disney motion pictures, for television, and theme parks. From David Crockett theme to conducting the Winnie the Pooh scores, from Grim Griminy Goes to If You Had Wings. And also he did an amazing work as Epcot's music director. So he picked up not only the great songs that we have in Epcot, and for me Epcot is a park that is so musical, and the music is important. And yes, and I needed to bring for Jason, and he was the one who supervised and made the whole arrangement of the medley for Impressions de France.
Thank you very much.
So Buddy Baker, our Buddy Baker, he he needed to be there.
Oh my gosh, that was bad even for us.
But you know, I respect a lot, Jason, that you have your no the work that he did in Impression de France is amazing. But for me, what stands out is, if you had wings, you can do many things. You can widen a word if you had wings. That's for me is the most amazing theme park song ever. I already told you that once here. Collin, your number three.
Yeah, and this is actually, I think it's the only one on my list that isn't parks related, but there's a very good reason for that, and I think we'd all agree on that. And mine is actually Robin Williams. And honestly, I didn't know he was a Disney legend until we looked through the list, and it had to be on my list after I saw the list. Who else can you think of except for Robin Williams, as far as the joy that he brought to so many different people, not only as the genie in various roles with the Disney company, but even beyond that? And that's part of the reason it's on my list, because you've got things like Good Will Hunting, you've got Mrs. Doubtfire, you've got so many things that he did, quite honestly, ad-libbed for most of it. And the influence that it still continues to have today. And I know there's a big book that's out currently that's called Robin, and it goes back through a lot of the things that he did with Disney, archiving some of the events and things that just worked. And one of the things that has always stood out to me is in scenes like when he's in the marketplace in Aladdin. They literally just stuck him in a room. They gave him some things and said, hey, go for it. And that's what you got out of it. I mean, there are very few people in the world that you can do that with. And the reality of it is just, it's stuff that comes off the tongue, and it fits so perfectly into the scene. And you can't replicate it. And he did the same thing with Good Morning Vietnam. I mean, how can you not love that? And for me, that's one of the things that stood the test of time with Disney and continues to be used around the parks time and time again. So even if it's not a person that's only done Disney stuff, the influence and the draw and even the heart to it all has influenced so many people.
Jason, you're number three.
I'm starting with Ub Iwerks, who was inducted in 1989, and he goes way back. I mean, I think the only person who goes further back at this point is Roy, with Walt, and they met in Kansas City. They started working on animation together there. The two of them, when Disney started his Laugh-O-Gram cartoon series, Iwerks joined him as the chief animator there. They worked on the Alice comedies together, and it was Iwerks who actually designed the character that became Oswald, the Lucky Rabbit, which is I think it's interesting. Anyway, so then the whole Universal Pictures fiasco things happened. Iwerks Oswald was hired away, and I'm sorry, Oswald was still kind of taken away, and eventually
Yeah.
iWorks after doing some other work. There's a controversy as to whether iWorks, like what his role was as it relates to creating Mickey Mouse. And like so some people credit him with kind of creating at least the more refined version of Mickey. He was also involved with Silly Symphonies and Steamboat Willie. He was actually like Steamboat Willie and the Skeleton Dance and the Haunted House were almost entirely animated by iWorks. So his impact during this early stage is huge. I mean, huge. It's hard to even know what Disney would be in terms of its works if he hadn't been involved. It's not that it wouldn't have happened necessarily, but eventually he leaves in like 1930. But then many years later he returns and works mostly on special effects, including combining live action and animation in Song of the South, which was a big deal at that point. He worked in WED, which eventually became Imagineering, helping with design of theme park attractions. And he won a this is interesting. I didn't know about this before I researched it. He won an Academy Award for his special effects for Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds.
Oh, really?
Isn't that cool? Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Anyway, so he's a pretty cool guy.
Yep.
Pretty impactful guy. Yeah.
So I'm going to my number 2. I need to bring, and I'll have to confess because she's my Disney. I would say one of my Disney crushes, and for me she's not only outstanding, but she's so classy, beautiful, and I'm talking about Mary Blair. And Mary Blair, not only for the drawing concepts that she worked in movies like from Alice to the in Wonderland, for Peter Pan, some Song of the South, from Cinderella, Lady and the Tramp, but the whole thing that designing the characters and designing attractions like Small World, like even El Rio del Tiempo in the Mexican Pavilion, and also the work that she did inside the Disney Contemporary Resort. If I want to talk about Mary Blair, I have to bring you have to watch because the whole thing that she does with watercolors, and there's a nice coincidence because Walt Disney brought her to be in the whole assemble, the whole group that traveled to South America during this the tour that he did to Brazil, Argentina, and then later on they went to Chile, and Mary Blair actually was brand new in that group, but the work that she did with watercolors, with a Brazilian song called Aquarela do Brasil. Aquarela is watercolor, is the translation, and you have to watch the short movie. I'll bring in the
on Disney Plus.
It is called Aquarela do Brasil. You're number 2, Collin.
Yeah, so I would be remiss if I didn't mention this name because it is one of those that is just so classic Disney in so many ways. You can't think of the parks, and you've been, either if you know it or you don't know it, if you've been to the parks, you've been on something he's had a hand in. And for me, it's Bob Gurr. From everything from the Matterhorn to the Skyway to, the monorails even. There's so many vehicles that he touched along the way that he created and designed from basically the ground up. And if you've ever tried to do that, it's near impossible from a creative standpoint to create something entirely new, and he managed to do it time and time again. And if you've been on a monorail, the current version is a rendition of what his original version was. And even before that, I believe he worked, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't looked this up in a little while, but either the Ford Motor Company or General Motors, one or the other, had Bob Gurr before he ended up with Imagineering and worked with Walt Disney directly. And he just took so many of those concepts and not only applied it to attraction vehicles like the Tomorrowland Speedway and things like that, but other items in the parks that you wouldn't expect, like when designing the Matterhorn. There are so many engineering feats that were made there with the first tubular roller coaster in the United States, well, in the world, really, to my understanding. It's just some stuff that had never been done before, and the creativity from an engineering perspective is just incredible, and it continues to be that way. You can find videos of him still today talking about some of the things that have been designed and redesigned and developed in the parks, and just the stories that he could tell of not only the engineering feats but the design feats. And some of it truly is brilliant, especially considering the time frame and the materials that he was working with at that point in time. I mean, you're talking late 50s for most of the stuff, especially at Disneyland. I mean, you didn't have processes on computers that were able to make some of this for you. It was all hand drawn and developed from there. I mean, you can't have a Disney Imagineer that you can look at and say, hey, he's had a hand in everything. Like, it's incredible.
Jason, you're number 2.
My number 2 is John Hench, who was inducted in 1990. So he joined Disney in 1939 as a sketch artist in the story department. And he first worked on Fantasia. But he was so good. He was so respected by Walt Disney. Really is one of the studio's most gifted artists. He was assigned pretty quickly to work with Salvador Dali on the animated short Destino, which, you know, we've talked about before, started in 1945 but didn't get finished until 2003. It was a long project. So anybody who's working on a project that's dragging on, just remember Destino. After that, he moves to WED Enterprises, which of course is Imagineering now. And in 1954, he was in the studio's live action department as the lead developer of the hydraulic giant squid in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea.
Oh,
now, this is a guy. So he starts off in animation as a sketch artist in Fantasia. He starts as a sketch artist, and not even 20 years later, he's now developing a hydraulic giant squid. He effectively wins the Academy Award for Best Special Effects that year. For that movie, and then he's also this is something I just learned. He was the official portrait artist of Mickey Mouse. So he painted the company's portraits for Mickey's 25th, 50th, 60th, 70th, and 75th birthdays. He led the design for Tomorrowland, for the Adventureland buildings and walkways, New Orleans Square and Disneyland, of course, Snow White's Grotto. He's also credited with designing Space Mountain, or at least participating in that, Cinderella Castle at Magic Kingdom, Tokyo Disneyland.
He was pretty involved in Epcot too.
And this is the thing. This is why I brought him in with Oob Iwerks, because Oob was there at the beginning, and it's hard to imagine a Disney without Oob. And I think some people have commented here tonight that they don't think Disney would exist without Oob Iwerks. John Hench, I think it's undisputed that he had an incredible effect on Disney, not just because of his talent and all the different departments he worked in and so forth, but he worked full time for Disney from 1939 until 2004, up until the day he died.
He died, yes.
At the age of 95, he was working full time for Disney. I mean, you can't. I mean, it's. I think it's hard to even begin to imagine how much impact he had.
Okay, so let's go to my number 1, X Atencio, and the X is because actually Walt Disney, his name was Javier Atencio, and said, "I'll call you X." And that's the way that he got the X Atencio. And X Atencio was pretty important as animator in movies like Fantasia. But the whole thing with X Atencio is the decisive work that he did as in 2 particular pieces, 2 songs, Green Grimly Ghosts and Yo-Ho, the Pirates theme, which is he was the lyricist. He wrote the lyrics for both songs, and also for If You Have Wings. But the whole thing with X Atencio is that he was a really good. He was really good in storytelling and scripts. There was also some people that say that Walt Disney had a kind of a good heart for him, because Walt was usually a guy that was not used to say you did a good work, or you to praise the work. He usually would do that throughout other people. But with X was different because he used to go to X and I like that, and he was X was used to have a sweet spot on Walt's heart. So this is X Atencio, and he worked closely with Buddy Baker and many other Imagineers. And I would say that my list is not in the order of preference. You could have Mary Blair in the top. Buddy Baker is they're legends. Collin, your number one.
Yeah, my number one was the only one I knew I was going to put on this list before I looked at the list. And for me, it's one of the few people in the Disney company that I'd still like to meet at some point and just shake their hand and say thank you, because it's just the influence that he's had not only on things that capture the imagination, but also the things that influence so many of the memories that we have of the parks. And it's Richard Sherman. I mean, think about some of your favorite attractions, the most classic ones around. And he's 93 years old at this point. He's been doing stuff on and off with Disney basically since he started. I mean, even a few years ago, he helped with some of the stuff for the Disneyland's anniversary. There are very few people like Richard Sherman left in the world, and I don't say that like generously or anything of the matter. Just the storytelling ability is truly incredible, and we all know the classic songs, The Age of Not Believing, Feed the Birds, The Best Time of Your Life. I mean, all these things that we all relate to. They all exist, they all are things, but when you hear him talk not only about like his experiences with Walt Disney or his experience with other cast members, it's always we. It's never me, it's never this, it's never that. Occasionally you'll hear him talk about his brother, and then even then it's always a team aspect. And then on top of that, you have this reality that when he's in interviews, you'll have a lot of people that'll never say a bad word about Walt Disney. And Richard Sherman will be very honest with the fact that there were some not so wonderful characteristics of Walt Disney. And I think that's important to recognize, because he also goes to the other end of the spectrum and says, those are also the things that made Walt Disney who he was. And it brought so much character to who he was as a person, but also the reputation that he had among not only his cast, but also people in the world around him. I mean, he had a vision, he wanted to stick to that vision, and you have to respect to a certain level while also recognizing the flaw. And I think Richard Sherman does that in interviews, and not only just in what he says and the way that he articulates things. And you can see it in just from moments that he shares the memories with Walt. He had so much respect for the man, but he also had so much respect for the process, which is really hard to articulate. But when you see a modern Disney compared to that version of Disney, it's a very different company, both good and bad. But when you look back and you hear those stories and you hear him talking about playing a song for Walt Disney, I mean, how many people in the world can say that? I mean, you sat in a window with the piano and Walt Disney said play it, and you played Feed the Birds for Walt Disney. I mean, how can you not love stories like that as a Disney fan, and hearing it from the guy who was there? And you can still do that. I mean, he's 93. He's only going to be with us forever. He's not going to be with us forever, unfortunately, but for most people, you'd love to shake his hand and just say thank you to the man, because he's brought so much joy to so many people over the years.
Jason, your number one, please.
So my number one, and it's a double, so Collin may say I'm cheating, I don't care. It's Lillian Disney and Edna Disney. And
at least
so
it's the same family.
and that's Lillian. You have Lillian there on the left, and Edna in the middle. Lillian, of course, was Walt's wife. Edna was Roy's wife. I won't spend a lot of time going through the history of either one of them. Just to say, there's a lot online about this. Actually, you can read about, if you go to the D23 site, you can read all about all of the various people we're talking about tonight, and some of the folks that you guys have mentioned as well about. Some of whom haven't received it yet, but a lot who have. But I think that Lillian and Edna, you cannot understate the impact that they had. I don't think Walt Disney as a company would exist. I don't think Walt Disney would have been the success that he was, and Roy able to help that success happen. I don't think any of that would have happened if it wasn't for Lillian and Edna being there to support them, to provide counsel, to pick them up and dust them off, and send them back into battle, to listen to their crazy ideas and actually go along with them. I mean, can you imagine what the dinner table would be like at Roy's house? And he comes home and describes the idea that his brother just shared with him, his little brother shared with him, and is now tasking him with finding the money or finding the means to do it. And Edna having to say, like, I'm gonna, I'm supporting you and do your thing. And I mean, it's incredible. It's incredible. I mean, I think the fact that these guys were able to achieve what they achieved shows how influential and how much of a role those two women played. And I don't think they get nearly enough credit for making this all possible. I have an honorable mention.
Yeah. So bring yours, and I'll bring mine after yours.
Mine and not like maybe some people don't know this name, but my honorable mention is Frank Wells, who was inducted in 1994, which was the same year that he passed away in a tragic helicopter crash. Frank Wells was the president and chief operating officer for 10 years, from 1984 to 1994. And he kind of stands in the shadow of Michael Eisner, who was really his partner during that period of time. Michael Eisner was the CEO. He was the COO. Interestingly enough, Frank Wells did not report to Michael Eisner. He reported to the board, which is unusual for a COO position. But I mean, it was during this period. This is the Disney decade that we talk about, that everybody talks about. And it was that partnership between Frank Wells and Michael Eisner that made so much of that success possible.
Yes.
And frankly, no pun intended there, sorry. Once Frank Wells is gone,
everything changed.
Michael Eisner really kind of begins to slide. I mean, he ran into health issues and leadership issues and all sorts of challenges. Some of which under his control, and some of which weren't. But I think it's a name that more people should know.
I'll go to my honorable mention. It's probably my favorite engineer, Imagineer, which is Mark Davis. And Mark Davis needed to be here. He was not only
You should throw Alice in too, while you're at it.
And yeah.
Might as well cheat some more while you're at it.
And
we're just gonna come with a list of like 75 ones and just rattle them all off.
And he was one of the Disney nine-old men. He was Disney's ladies' man. He was responsible for designing Snow White, Cinderella, Alice, Aurora, Maleficent, Cruella de Vil, Tinkerbell. Come on. And also Bambi. And then he was totally... And then when Walt pushed him to work as an Imagineer, again, doing that crazy Walt thing, he was an amazing animator. He said, no, you know one thing, now you're going to work with me in the theme parks. And from that one, you have Jungle Cruise, Ticket Room, Carousel of Progress, Pirates of the Caribbean, Haunted Mansion, and the other thing is that nobody talks about all the attractions that he worked pretty hard that never saw the light of the day.
They're sitting on the shelf somewhere.
Western River Expedition, the Enchanted Snow Palace, that actually they use it, and that's the beauty of Imagineering too, because sometimes they dig on the old project and they bring things like that. So part of those experiences were used even in the Splash Mountain, or even in the Frozen attraction in Epcot. Come on, it's great. So this is for me, and everybody said that he used to be a pretty funny guy, really nice guy to work with, and Mark Davis is my favorite engineer. Is Imagineer. Is one of the ones that I have the most books here, and I'm a big fan.